The silence in the bank was deafening. Diana Thompson stood there, motionless in front of the counter, feeling the weight of dozens of curious stares, while manager Robert Kim shook his head disdainfully. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the documents that had just been rejected for the third consecutive time. "Sorry, madam, but I cannot process this transfer," Kim said with a tone that cut like ice. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the cold air conditioning created a hostile atmosphere that seemed to swallow any hope. To understand how we arrived at this moment of palpable tension, we need to go back a few hours. Diana had awakened that Tuesday morning with the same energy that had accompanied her for 3 years, working as Steph Curry's personal assistant. Have you ever wondered what it's like to work with one of the world's greatest basketball stars? The answer was simple. Each day brought a new opportunity to make a difference in the lives of people who never imagined they were on Curry's radar. The phone rang at 7:15 a.m., as always. It was Steph, his voice carrying that contagious enthusiasm that made Diana smile even before her first coffee. "Diana, good morning. We have a special situation today," he said, and she could sense that something important was coming. "Do you remember the Oakland Dreams project we discussed last week?" How could she forget? Oakland Dreams was the project closest to Steph's heart, the construction of our complete community basketball court in one of Oakland's most underserved areas, his hometown. It wasn't just about sports. It was about giving tangible hope to children who grew up seeing more problems than possibilities. "Of course, Steph. What do you need?" Diana responded, already grabbing her tablet to note the details. The construction company got an unexpected opening in their schedule. If we transfer the $50,000 by noon, they can start construction this week. It's impossible not to feel that this is the right moment, Diana. $50,000. For many people, an astronomical amount. For Steph Curry, an investment in his community's future. For Diana, another responsibility that she would handle with maximum care and dedication. "It's done, Steph. I'll go to the bank right now with all the documentation. Leave it to me." "You're incredible, Diana. You know I trust you more than anyone else for these important things, right?" Great things happen when the right people are in the right places. That was a phrase Steph always repeated. And Diana felt the positive weight of that responsibility. She dressed with the same professional care as always. Navy blue blazer, documents organized in a leather folder, and that confidence that came from years of solving complex issues without ever failing. What's most impressive is how small details can completely change the course of a day. The Bank of America on Market Street was where Steph maintained one of his business accounts. Diana had been there dozens of times, always treated with courtesy and efficiency. Why would today be different? She entered the bank, feeling the coolness of the air conditioning contrasting with San Francisco's heat. The polished marble reflected the natural light entering through the large windows, and the low murmur of conversations created that typical urban symphony of busy financial institutions. "Good morning. I need to make a business transfer," Diana said as she approached the counter, extending the documents with a professional smile. The initial employee directed her to Robert Kim, the manager, who received her with a greeting that seemed cordial on the surface, but carried something Diana couldn't completely identify. $50,000 is a considerable amount, Kim commented, leafing through the papers with a deliberate slowness that made each second feel like an eternity. "Yes, it's for a community project by Mr. Curry. All the documentation is there, including his authorizations and the construction company's data," Diana explained, maintaining her professional tone despite a strange sensation that was beginning to form a knot in her stomach. Kim looked at Diana, then at the documents, then back at Diana. Something that touches deeply is when you realize you're being judged, not for what you did, but for who you are. I need to verify a few things. Please wait a moment. That moment turned into 10 minutes. Then 15. Diana watched Kim making phone calls, checking computer screens, and occasionally casting glances in her direction that carried increasingly evident distrust. Have you ever felt like you were being dissected by looks that question your legitimacy? Diana began to understand that this wasn't about standard banking procedures. "Mrs. Thompson," Kim said, returning with an expression that had lost any trace of cordiality, "we have some concerns about this transaction." "What kind of concerns?" "All the documentation is in order." "I understand, but transfers of this magnitude require additional verifications, especially when—" he paused meaningfully, "when there are authenticity issues involved." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Diana felt that type of cold that comes from within, when you realize you're facing something much bigger and darker than a simple banking transaction. "Authenticity issues? Mr. Kim, I've worked for Steph Curry for 3 years. I have legal power of attorney, complete documentation, and I've made hundreds of transactions at this bank." "Yes, but never of this magnitude. And frankly, Mrs. Thompson," he lowered his voice, creating a forced intimacy that sounded like a threat, "it's hard to believe that someone like Steph Curry would trust such a significant amount to, well, you understand." At that moment, Diana understood that she wasn't facing bureaucracy. She was facing pure and crystalline prejudice, disguised as banking procedures. And it was exactly at that moment that her phone rang. Steph Curry was worried about the delay, but what none of them imagined was that in exactly 13 minutes, everything happening in that bank would be transformed forever. Great things happen when no one is looking, but sometimes they happen when everyone is looking. Steph Curry was on the other end of the line, and Diana could feel the genuine concern in his voice. The warmth of emotion contrasted drastically with the cold environment that Kim had created around her. "Diana, is everything okay there? It's almost 10:30. "Steph, I'm at the bank, but—" She lowered her voice, feeling Kim's eyes fixed on her like lasers. "I'm facing some difficulties." "What kind of difficulties? I need you to explain exactly what's happening." Diana looked at Kim, who now didn't even bother to disguise his impatience. It was possible to perceive that he was enjoying that moment of power, savoring each second of discomfort he could inflict. "The manager is questioning the legitimacy of the transfer, even with all the documentation in order." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Diana knew Steph well enough to know he was processing not just the words, but the tone behind them. "Diana, do you want me to talk to him?" "No, Steph. Leave it to me. I'll solve this." But while hanging up the phone, Diana felt she was entering completely new territory. It was no longer about banking procedures. It was about something much deeper and more disturbing. Kim approached again, now accompanied by another employee, Tyler Brooks, according to his identification. Reinforcement had arrived, as if Diana represented some kind of threat that required additional supervision. "Mrs. Thompson, we spoke with our security team," Kim said, and each word sounded like drops of cold rain. "And we have serious concerns about the origin of these funds." "The origin of the funds? Mr. Kim, this is a business account of Steph Curry, a public figure. There's nothing questionable about the origin of these funds." "I understand your position, but—" He made a theatrical pause, clearly planned. "When a person like you appears wanting to move $50,000 all at once, Naturally, that raises red flags. A person like you. The words echoed in Diana's mind like distant thunder announcing the storm. How many times in life does a simple phrase carry the weight of centuries of injustice? Tyler Brooks leafed through the documents with a slowness that seemed almost insulting. This power of attorney document? Could you explain to us how exactly you obtained this authorization? The question was loaded with insinuations that made Diana's stomach churn. It was as if they were suggesting she had forged, manipulated, or illegally obtained something that was completely legitimate. I obtained this power of attorney because I work for Steph Curry for 3 years, because he trusts me, because I'm qualified and competent to handle his business financial matters. I see, Kim said, but his tone suggested exactly the opposite. But you must understand our position. It's very unusual to see someone in your position with access to this type of resource. In your position, another phrase that cut like a sharp blade. Diana felt a mixture of anger and sadness forming in her chest, an emotional storm that threatened to overflow at any moment. Have you ever had the feeling that you were being judged not for your work, but for the color of your skin? Diana had always known this day might come, but she never imagined it would be so blatant and humiliating. "Gentlemen," she said, breathing deeply to maintain professional composure, "I have complete legal documentation, valid identification, and a history of transactions at this bank. What exactly are you questioning?" Kim and Brooks exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes of non-verbal information. It was the type of silent complicity that deliberately excludes anyone who isn't part of the inner circle. "Mrs. Thompson, let's be direct," Brooks said, taking command of the conversation. "Transfers of this magnitude require approval from the regional manager. And frankly, based on the profile of this request, we recommend that you seek an institution that is more prepared to handle this type of situation." The silence that followed was deafening. Diana felt as if she had received a punch to the stomach. They weren't just denying the transfer. They were suggesting she look for another bank. "The profile of this request?" Diana repeated, her voice maintaining a control she didn't know she possessed. "A personal assistant of a celebrity trying to move a significant amount. You must understand that this raises questions of credibility." At that moment, something fundamentally changed in Diana's perception. She realized she wasn't facing questionable banking procedures. She was facing institutional racism disguised as security policies. The heavy atmosphere of the bank seemed to press on her lungs, and the low murmur of other conversations created a surreal soundtrack for what was becoming one of the most humiliating moments of her professional life. Great things happen when the right people take a stand, and Diana was about to discover that sometimes we ourselves are those right people. She picked up her phone, and, this time, her call wouldn't be to apologize for the delay. It would be to tell Steph Curry exactly what was happening. And Steph Curry, as Diana was about to discover, had a very particular way of dealing with injustices. What's most impressive is how some moments can define not just a day, but the character of all the people involved. In 13 minutes, everything would change forever. Diana was about to dial Steph's number when the bank's glass doors opened with a smooth movement that contrasted dramatically with the electric tension dominating the environment. Steph Curry entered with that natural presence that made heads turn automatically. It wasn't just about fame. It was about genuine energy that transformed any space. The murmur of conversations gradually ceased, like waves receding from the beach. "Diana!" His voice carried relief and concern in equal measures. "Sorry I came, but you seemed, well, you never seem worried, so I figured something was really wrong." Kim and Brooks straightened instantly, like soldiers who had just spotted the general. The transformation was so sudden it was almost comical, if it weren't so revealing. "Mr. Curry!" Kim practically jumped from behind the counter, his voice now sweet as melted sugar. "What an honor to have you at our branch. How can I help you?" Steph looked from Kim to Diana, then back to Kim. Have you ever witnessed the exact moment when someone understands a complex situation just by observing body language and environmental energy? "Actually," Steph said, his voice maintaining that cordial tone his fans knew well, "I came to check why my assistant has been here for over an hour, trying to make a simple transfer." "Oh, well, Mr. Curry, it's just that—" Kim stammered, suddenly lost. "They're standard procedures for high-value transfers." "Standard procedures?" Steph interrupted gently, but there was something in the question that made the air denser. "Diana, can you explain to me exactly what these standard procedures were?" Diana felt the weight of the moment. It was her chance to speak the truth, but she also knew her words could define not just her dignity, but perhaps other people's consciousness. "Steph, they questioned the legitimacy of the power of attorney, suggested that the origin of the funds was questionable and," she breathed deeply, "said that someone in my position, moving this amount, raised red flags." The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was the type of silence that precedes earthquakes. Steph Curry remained motionless for a moment that seemed eternal, processing not just the words, but the entire situation. When he turned to Kim, there was no anger on his face. There was something much more powerful: deep disappointment and crystalline determination. "Mr. Kim," Steph said, and his voice had that quality that made entire stadiums fall silent. "Could you explain to me exactly what you meant by someone in her position?" Kim visibly paled. Well, that's not what I meant. It's just that—" "Because I'll tell you something, Mr. Kim. Diana Thompson isn't just my assistant. She's one of the most honest, competent, and trustworthy people I've ever met. She has an MBA in administration, speaks 3 languages, and in the last 3 years has never, and I mean never, made a single mistake in hundreds of transactions." Steph's voice had a hypnotic cadence that made each word penetrate deeply. You could feel how other people in the bank had stopped their activities to listen. "But more important than her professional qualifications," Steph continued, "Diana is the person who coordinates our charitable projects. She's the one who ensures that Oakland children have access to sports programs. She's the one who organizes donations for needy families. She's the one who transforms my ability to help into concrete actions that change lives." Kim and Brooks seemed to have physically shrunk. The MICDB weight of Steph's words created an almost palpable atmospheric pressure. "So when you question her position, or suggest she doesn't have credibility to handle financial resources, you're not just insulting my employee. You're insulting a person who dedicates her life to making a positive difference in the world." Steph paused, allowing his words to settle like dust after an explosion. "Now," he said, his voice resuming the cordial tone but loaded with unquestionable authority, "let's process this transfer so that 50 Oakland children can have a new court to play basketball. And afterward, you're going to review your standard procedures because, frankly, what I witnessed here today doesn't align with the values a respectable institution should have. Kim practically stumbled toward the computer. Of course, Mr. Curry, immediately. Tyler, process the transfer now. But Steph wasn't finished. He turned to the other people in the bank, customers and employees who had witnessed the entire situation. Great things happen when we refuse to accept that people are treated differently because of skin color, social origin, or any other factor that isn't their character and competence. He placed his hand on Diana's shoulder, a simple gesture that carried volumes of meaning. Diana, you have nothing to prove to anyone here. Your dignity and value don't depend on their approval. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. An elderly customer who was in line began to applaud. Then another customer. Within seconds, the entire bank was applauding Diana Thompson. Tears ran down Diana's face, but they weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and a deep feeling that justice had been done. Steph looked one last time at Kim. Was the transfer processed? Yes, sir. Successfully completed. Great. Diana, let's go. We have a court to build. As they left the bank, Diana knew those 13 minutes had changed more than just her morning. They had changed the lives of several people who witnessed what happens when someone decides that human dignity is non-negotiable. What's most impressive is how moments of injustice can transform into powerful lessons when the right people take the right position. 3 weeks later, Diana Thompson was at the same bank on Market Street. But everything had changed. The environment that once weighed like lead now carried a completely different energy. You could perceive that something fundamental had transformed not just in the atmosphere, but in the soul of that place. She wasn't there for a routine transaction. She was there by an unexpected invitation. Mrs. Thompson, said Christopher Lee, the new regional manager who had taken over the branch, thank you for accepting our invitation. I know that after what happened, it would be understandable if you never wanted to step foot here again. Diana smiled, feeling that type of warmth that comes when you realize your pain served something greater. Mr. Lee, I believe people can change. And more importantly, I believe institutions can too. What's most impressive is how a moment of injustice can become the catalyst for changes that benefit thousands of people. Christopher Lee led her to a meeting room where a presentation awaited. We want to show you the changes we implemented after learning some important lessons about respect and human dignity. On the wall, a banner displayed Diversity and Inclusion Training. Program, Bank of America, Market Street. It was the type of change that goes beyond beautiful words in corporate manuals. First, Lee explained, we completely revised our service protocols. We created a supervision system that ensures no customer is treated differently based on appearance, origin, or any factor that isn't strictly related to legitimate banking procedures. Diana nodded, but there was a question in her eyes that Lee immediately caught. And Robert Kim? She asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity, not revenge. Kim was transferred to our corporate training division. Ironically, he became one of our most effective instructors about unconscious bias. Sometimes, the people who most need to learn a lesson are those who can best teach others not to make the same mistakes. Have you ever wondered what the world would be like if every moment of injustice transformed into an education opportunity instead of just punishment? But the most significant change, Lee Maifidridrith continued, opening a folder with documents, is our new community partnership program, inspired by Mr. Curry's Oakland Dreams project. Diana felt her heart accelerate. Community partnership? We created a special fund to finance community projects in underserved areas. Not just in Oakland, but throughout the entire Bay Area. The bank now allocates 2% of our annual profits to initiatives that really make a difference in people's lives. It was impossible not to feel that those 13 minutes of humiliation had transformed into something much bigger than Diana had ever imagined possible. "And there's more," Lee said, with a genuine smile. "We want you to be our official consultant for this program. No one better than someone who understands both community projects and, well, about how people deserve to be treated." At that moment, Diana understood that great things happen when we transform our pain into purpose, our humiliation into motivation for positive change. 2 hours later, Diana was back at Steph Curry's office, sharing the news. Steph listened attentively, that characteristic smile spreading across his face. "Diana, do you realize what you did?" he asked, leaning forward with that intensity he reserved for matters that really mattered. "I didn't do anything, Steph. You were the one who—" "No," he interrupted gently. "You maintained your dignity when it would have been easy to collapse. You spoke the truth when it would have been more comfortable to stay quiet. You transformed a moment of injustice into a lesson for all of us." Steph stood up and walked to the window overlooking Oakland. "You know, Diana, I can make 3-point shots in front of 20,000 screaming people. But you did something much more difficult. You stood firm when only one person mattered. Yourself." Diana felt tears of gratitude forming. It wasn't about the bank anymore, or about the transfer, or even about the Oakland Dreams project, although the court was almost ready and children were already signing up for the first practices. It was about something much deeper. The understanding that each of us has the power to choose how to respond when the world tests us. "Steph," she said, her voice loaded with emotion, "thank you for showing me that defending people's dignity isn't optional. It's mandatory." He turned, that radiant smile illuminating his face. "Diana, thank you for reminding me that great things don't just happen when we score points. They happen when we decide that every person deserves respect, regardless of who's watching." 6 months later, the Bank of America's Community Partnership Program had financed 12 projects in underserved communities. Robert Kim had become a recognized speaker on diversity and inclusion, and Diana Thompson had been promoted to Director of Social Responsibility at Steph Curry's company. But perhaps the most important change happened at a level few could measure. Each person who witnessed those 13 minutes at the bank left there a little different, a little more aware that human dignity isn't a privilege to be granted, but a right to be respected. The Oakland Dreams Court was inaugurated on a sunny Saturday afternoon. 50 children ran across the new court, their shouts of joy echoing through the neighborhood like a symphony of hope. Diana was in the bleachers next to Steph, watching those children discover that dreams can become reality when the right people refuse to accept injustices. "Do you know what's the most incredible part of all this?" Steph asked, pointing to the children. "What?" "They'll never know this court exists because you had the courage to face prejudice. To them, this is just a place to play, dream, and grow. And maybe that's exactly how it should be." Diana smiled, finally understanding that great things happen when no one is looking, but sometimes they echo forever when everyone is looking. The silence in the bank had transformed into shouts of joy from children playing. Humiliation had become education, and an injustice of 13 minutes had become a lesson that would last generations. Because in the end, what's most impressive isn't how much we can achieve when everything is easy, It's how much we can transform when everything seems impossible.